Data center is delayed not because technology failed, but because the grid connectivity could not arrive at time. A profitable business watches its margins shrink not because its products lost relevance, but because its energy costs, fuel exposure, and supply dependence never treated as a strategic risk. For decades, energy was managed as an operating expense. Today, it's becoming a defining choice between continuity, competence, growth, and survival. Why this topic matters now? Energy demands are rising while companies simultaneously face geopolitical uncertainty, grid constraints, volatile prices, climate disruption, critical mineral concentration, and increasing pressure to the World Economic Forum reported that although global energy transition progress accelerated in 2025, energy security stagnated because of inflexibility of power systems, import dependencies, and limited diversification. It also noted energy demand rose by 2.2%, driven partially by AI, data centers, cooling, and electrification. Energy decisions can therefore no longer be separated from technology strategy, supply chain, resilience, financial planning, cybersecurity, market access, and corporate governance. Through this conversation, leaders will understand why energy must move from the facilities agenda to the board agenda, why energy choices affect operational continuity margins and digital growth, why low cost energy options may not always be the most relevant, and how companies can balance affordability, reliability, and sustainability. What practical decisions leaders should make before energy constraints become business constraints. About our speakers and the relevance of this topic, Gauri brings extensive experience across energy transition, clean technology, applied economics, finance, energy pricing, policy development, and market entry strategy with operational benchmark. She is an executive director at S&P Global, identifying her as an executive director in its energy transition and clean tech global construction with 23 years to 30 years of experience applied economics and finance. Her work includes integration, new energy sources development, multi-sector migration strategies, and helping companies and countries understand the commercial and operational implications of changing energy systems. Before we dive into the topic, let's have a small video about Power of Knowing Forum and bring our speaker to the topic. Welcome to Preeminent Conclave, the weekly podcast series by Power of Knowing Forum, where insights become strategic advantage. Our conversation is why energy choices will decide which company stays resilient. Let's welcome our speaker to the podcast and dive into the topic. Hi Gauri, welcome to our podcast. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you so much. A very good evening to you and all the viewers today on your platform. I was really delighted when you shared an invitation with me on your preeminent conclave platform, Prem. So thank you for having me here.
A small intro about yourself, Gauri, to the audience.
Sure. I am as you, thanks for the kind introduction that you've done, Prem, but I'll just add a couple of things. So I am the Global Executive Director for Strategic Climate and Clean Energy Initiatives for S&P Global, based out of India. I lead two portfolios for S&P Global in India. One is consulting, especially with a focus on board engagements to take the energy agenda, especially towards also expand it to non-energy boards which are more energy intensive, consumer facing industries, to really raise the awareness of the energy agenda for such boards. And I lead my second portfolio, which I lead for S&P Global in India, is CERAWeek, which is a preeminent platform for the energy business. For the Financial Times has called it the Davos of energy, and really it is about having an annual meeting of the partners in this. We have more than 150 partners, which are the world's largest energy, financial, and data center, also now chip companies. So it's really about having the right conversation. And that is why I was very delighted to join your platform, because I think that is the vision here which you had shared with me. And I'd also like to thank, my mentor, Dr. Amit Nagpal, who had shared your contacts very kindly to further a conversation on this platform.
Yeah, and Amit sir also has been part of the podcast series, and
He mentioned, yes.
so and he said I will refer more and more people to share their knowledge, and so thank you for that, Gauri. Now let's begin the topic
Mhm.
with the fundamentals taking place. Every energy or energy was once treated largely as a procurement or an operational constraint.
Mhm.
Today, it determines whether organizations can continue operating, scaling, and competing. What is your take on it?
I think that's very well framed, Prem, and I really liked your introduction on how you talked about, data centers, margin dependence of different businesses, non-energy businesses as well. I mean, you take sector by sector, and I think the question I would start with is, what is really the single biggest constraint today? We are still in the middle of a war in the Middle East. We are still in a tariff shock which started last year. The Ukraine war hasn't ended, and we I think every year, post COVID, and also if you see many cycles of financial crisis in 2008, you see the Asian financial crisis back in the late 90s. I think in the last 30 years you can name about six key crises, six or seven key crises in the world, starting had different starting points. And I think the common thread to all of them was that somewhere the single biggest constraint, and as we're seeing today, uh, is actually energy. And I would almost argue that it's ironical that that single biggest constraint, as we're seeing pan out now, in the aftermath of the war, can become the single biggest point of potential or possible failure for a business as well. So, in S&P Global, we have a tagline for our energy business, which is um, everything is energy. And it does go back to something Nikola Tesla had said, that everything is energy is everything. So I think in that sense, energy is sometimes visible when we, when we switch on the electricity in our homes, in our offices, or when we put in petrol in our gas tank, or nowadays when we put in the electric charging point. So in that sense, electricity energy can be very visible. However, how it really comes to us, how it is really produced, and how the whole value chain of energy works can be quite invisible, actually. So it is, I think, it's ironical. It's the single biggest constraint sometimes. We're seeing that also with, AI and the whole conversation on data centers, right? Where increasingly the specs of data centers are more linked to their power specs than their compute and just chip how much chips they are consuming, or what is the real computing capacity. It's now we're talking about a 1.5 gigawatt data center or a 500 megawatt data center, which was not the case earlier, and that's clearly pointing out that that is the single biggest constraint, possibly the single biggest potential failure. So really, it's ironical. Something so essential is the visible, sometimes invisible lifeline, and it is truly everything.
So I think today the consumption on the power side has increased manifolds,
Mhm.
right? I think
Mhm.
the number of data centers which were there earlier to compare to what we are having today,
Right,
with AI coming in, I think we see more usage of power and cooling for all the compute that is there.
right.
Why has energy moved from being an operational input to becoming a level determinant of business resilience?
Right. So I think it's kind of ratcheted up every year, and I think this is the year, I would almost argue, is the year of reckoning, where it just that the energy question cannot be avoided at the shop floor, at the boardroom, because I was with my team. I was looking at just the energy exposure uh, of different companies across, like key companies across metals and mining, steel, aluminum, airlines, all the backbone sectors of the economy, what we also now call the hard to abate sectors of the economy. And it was interesting, their exposure to energy as operating expenses ranges anywhere from 20 to 40%. Now, that is a very significant exposure in any year. And
Mm,
in a year where, across the board, there have been many dependencies that have come up in the supply chain, whether it is, again, copper, aluminum,
mm,
bitumen, fertilizers, key petrochemicals. You're seeing the cost basis for many critical inputs in manufacturing going up, depending on the sector, depending on the situation. It is 10, 15, 20, 30% in many cases. When we look at even the solar manufacturing side, when we look at key inputs into sectors such as even road construction, for instance. I mean,
mm,
you know, India has been increasing its road building at a very rapid pace, and the price of bitumen has doubled, and 99% of bitumen, which was imported into India, where our import dependence was about 40-50%, 45-50% on average, 99% came from the Gulf. So really the one of the highest dependencies in the infrastructure sector. So when we put all that together, you see a picture where I think what really I think the question I would ask is, are really the boards of India and globally ready for the energy conversation? And if you bring it down to what you started with, the AI and data centers, are the AI companies understanding energy and all the optionality in energy, all the options, how can you make a portfolio of energy? Energy is not, depending on your location, depending on the resource base, that portfolio can be different in Gujarat, can be different in Maharashtra, can be different in Andhra Pradesh. So there is no one silver bullet. There is no one solution, right? So I think what I would question, and it's something which really spurs me on to many conversations, is, are boards really ready for an energy conversation, and have they really moved it from the procurement department and elevated the conversation to understand the strategic nature of energy? Because it is one sector which really has everything acting upon it: economics, politics, geopolitics, geoeconomics, technology. I mean, we talk about the energy transition, right? And and we talk about the energy transition in terms of certain again, very visible technologies, very mature technologies now, like solar, wind, and then some new and up and coming technologies as well, like batteries, and within batteries, different types of cell chemistries. But really, I mean, I think what is the understanding of those technologies, and understanding the energy transition also as a technology transition, is not quite there yet. And I think that is where Prem, at S&P Global, one of the things we are trying to do a lot more in India is really sensitizing a lot of energy intensive sectors. Uh, you know, companies which are not called energy companies. They're not providers of energy. They're not producers of energy. They're large consumers of energy, including AI and data centers. To really take board workshops to them, sensitize them. And to that extent, I am very happy to share that we are the exclusive knowledge partner um, for a company which serves India's board community, board stewardship, which is led by very preeminent people like Vikesh Valia and Selish Haribhakti. So I think it's about making the boards ready for that, and I don't think they're there yet. I think it's a long journey. I think you're on mute. Did I lose you?
Yeah, got it. So, what has changed, Gauri, from the in the relationship between energy availability,
Mhm.
corporate continuity, and competitive advantage? What fundamentally has changed?
I think it's a great question, and when I look at change as an economist, I uh, try to have a framework in terms of what is that change comprised, right?
Mm,
There are certain trends which have been happening for a long period of time, and those trends are the rise of Asia, the more recent rise of Africa, in terms
mm,
of economic growth. If you look at all key macroeconomic indicators, whether it's growth, spending, sector by sector, the preponderance of these two geographies, Asia and Africa, is critical. And in Asia, you have also the world's two large population centers, which is India and China. So that's a trend growth which has happened, I would say, relentlessly over the last 30 years. And it's only accelerated as we've come into the latter few years. Then the second component of change is a structural shift. And I think
mm.
that is where um, AI is interesting. It is something which every business in its own way is trying to contend with. I think it's a new operating system which we are beginning to adopt and adapt to, right? I mean, I remember thinking or facing similar questions 30 years back at the time of the dot-com era, right, where the internet just came. And it was interesting, the internet really came because of initial usage in the defense side. But this time, I think AI is a use case which has come as a sort of a natural development, because AI has been there since the late 1950s, from the Turing times, right? So I think there is a structural shift we are in the midst of. Um, and that structural shift, in addition to technology and technological options in energy, which of course comprise the energy transition, um, I think there are also geopolitical shifts. There is the rise of Asian powers in geopolitics. So
Mm.
geopolitics is part of that structural shift as well. And then I think the second aspect of that change is that in the middle of these structural changes and these trend increases, you have the occurrence of wars, you have the occurrence of pandemics, and you have an occurrence of a heightened tariff environment, which again goes back to politics. So I think when you put together structural shifts, trends, and random events, you begin to have a framework to understand this change and its many components. And it's almost like a board needs a dashboard to understand each of these components in its fullness.
Got it, Gauri. So what we are also saying is it is depend on lot of factors globally. That's the
Yes.
first point that I'm trying to understand. Now, which organizations remain most vulnerable because they treat energy primarily as a facilities procurement or sustainable responsibility review?
Mhm.
Your take on it.
Yeah, I think actually it would be the technology majors,
Mm,
the companies which are driving this new shift towards AI. I was looking at some statistics which were mind-boggling to me,
mhm,
um, and and the reason I say it is because uh, I feel the AI companies, the technology companies, feel that they are in the driver's seat of this structural shift in the operating system of companies, of individuals, of organizations, of countries as well. And they feel they are in the driver's seat, but actually their biggest constraint is energy. And I think that is where I do think that these are the companies which have to understand energy the best, the technology companies, because some of the numbers around them, it's ironical, are really really stark. I mean, if you look at just the debt, just the top five companies, technology companies, which are the vanguard of AI deployment, they have something of the order of $1.65 trillion dollars in off balance sheet debt, in
okay.
addition to about $1.35 trillion dollars in balance sheet debt. When you look at the spending numbers, you really see actually a convergence with energy. Say by about 2027, S&P Global estimates suggest that these top five companies will spend about $550 billion dollars in
Mm,
data center deployment. And when you look at numbers related to clean energy deployment, you see that by 2030 that number is about $900 billion plus. So very you're in the same orders of magnitude here. So there's a real convergence that is happening between the tech side and the energy side, and the chip manufacturers, and the challenges on compute as well, because these data centers are also, taking about 70% of the high-end chips, right?
yeah.
Uh, so so some of their limiting factors will be energy, water, and that whole nexus of really that infrastructure which supports these hyperscalers.
Got it. Now, what are the early warning signs indicating that companies' energy exposure is becoming a material strategic risk because uh, it is dependent on it, right? So, your take.
Right, right. So I think on the one hand, we hear numbers which are very top line linked, which is
Mm,
about
mm,
growth, which is about expansion in data centers, billions of dollars of investments which are going in. But at the same time, if you look at the bottom line corresponding to that top line, the main line item there will be, and increasingly in an ongoing war situation, will be energy. So I think that is the main risk which has to be mitigated, has to be addressed through. I would almost call it, Prem, a more proactive approach to energy, not a reactive approach wherein we take the inputs of, okay, what are the pricing trends, what can happen. And I'm beginning to see the early signs of that proactive approach, which means we've seen an indication of in Vishakhapatnam, the Google data center, which is coming up, which is going to be their main hub for AI based data centers. Google, there was an announcement that will be able to have its own distribution license for
mm.
power procurement, so they will not be dependent on the grid. So I think I do see early signs of that happening. They're happening even in the US. A lot of the new build capacity, whether it's coming from gas, from also from nuclear in the US, is linked increasingly to data centers. So I think, but these are early signs. I think that proactive approach to energy has to percolate down to other hard to abate sectors where emissions are not just energy related emissions but also process related emissions. So those are sectors where it's not very easy to substitute existing older forms of energy, fossil fuel based energy,
Mm.
with at with renewable energy. So I think those are sectors which are the hard to decarbonize sectors where an even greater proactive approach to bring in solutions like carbon capture, utilization, and storage, potentially hydrogen in the medium to long run,
Yeah,
will also be very important. So I think, but to me, the silver lining in all this is that we have a lot of options, right?
yeah,
So, and it is really about the boards moving beyond this sort of alphabet soup, if you will, of uh, you know new language models and
yeah.
which model to adopt, and which form of energy to adopt, but really trying to understand what are the top features of these different energy options and how do they match with say the technology options in energy, and how does energy underpin their overall technology choice sets.
I think see, what we are talking is we need to distinguish between energy as a commodity and an energy as a business dependent. I think that's the first point that we should look at. Uh, if you look at companies may possess strong products, technology, talent, demand, but still face disruption, right? So that is one thing that cannot secure reliability, affordability, and for manufacturing, logistic, cooling, cloud, and critical supplies, right? Now the potential warnings that we see in the industry is rising energy costs, right? And as you rightly said, there is uh, war there, and geopolitical pointers are dependency on a single fuel
Mhm.
supplier or a grid region, right?
Right.
And if you we've seen where frequent power quality or continuous incidents where power was disturbed, and there has been incidents where you were not able to have energy to control the data center. Expansion plans are constrained by grid availability, which we
Mhm.
started with that only because grid availability is one thing that decarbonized commitments without funding execution plans. So these are few things that I think are potential warnings. And World
Yes.
Economic Forum in 2025 translated indexes found that 65% of the countries import overall scores, right? The countries improve their overall scores, but energy security remains to be constrained by the grid flexibility, which we
Right.
spoke about. Import dependency and insufficient diversification, that is one more challenge that we face. Despite approximately about 2 trillion is clean energy investment during 2024, and infrastructure and security weaknesses continue to explore business to disruption, right? So that is the challenges we see. uh,
Yeah.
Today we cannot say energy is not longer only a cost in the income state, it is a resilient dependency across the enterprise. That is
Mhm.
what we would like to say. And how should companies balance energy affordability, sustainability? When improving one can sometimes weaken the other.
Right. I think
What's your take
great
on it?
question, because yes, I think what you've really
Hello.
brought out is the energy trilemma. Can you hear me? I think your connection is a little.
Yes,
Uh,
yes, yeah.
okay. So I think what you really brought out is the energy trilemma there, Prem, which has been a framework which came from the World Energy Council, and it's been adopted very widely. Um,
Mm,
I think the best way to address the energy question, whether it's from each of these three lenses that you mentioned, sustainability, affordability, availability, is the aspect about, where does price, cost, and value give you the best combination? Often what happens in these decisions, and that's where we go. I go back to where you started this conversation. That how does energy move from a line item discussion, an operational discussion, to a more elevated board level discussion. And I think that is where energy has to be viewed not from the lens of what is my cheapest form of energy, because it is a very high uh, uh, you know uh, dependence in the operating expense. Because the moment you bring in variables like reliability, resilience, which become very important from a geopolitical standpoint of supply chain dependencies, it also becomes very important from a perspective of grid level dependency. How much dependence do you have on the grid? Do you have the phenomenon of blackouts in certain industries, for instance? Do you have reliability? Do you have sort of the right mix of cost and reliability, so your tariff increases in check in versus the reliability that you are being offered by the energy providers? So I think it's very important to understand that we do not go for an L1 solution, a lowest cost solution, because sometimes the cheapest uh, solution, whether in terms of technology or a tariff which has been arrived to at a fixed or at a certain period for something like 25 years, um, it does not fully reflect the costs, which can increase over the lifespan of those 25 years, and the value of reliability and resilience. So I think, it is very important to understand for companies, and that is where this becomes a strategic conversation, where you don't push it down the throats of the procurement teams to beat down on price, is that what is my price of energy reflecting? Is it reflecting the value of resilience and reliability? And is it reflecting the costs, the full costs of integration of newer forms of energy, which may come with different levels of reliability because of the features of those newer forms of energy, whether it's terms of lower plant load factors or dependence on weather phenomenon. So I think, uh, at the end of the day, one has to understand that triangle of price, cost, and value. uh, what am I paying for? Am I paying for the cheapest solution? Is paying for the cheapest solution maximizing my value, my objective function? Or is it really exposing me to further risks down the line? So I may actually settle for, say, a midline price solution, which actually reflects a better combination of reliability, resilience, and the right costs of integration of newer forms of energy with older forms of energy in the most optimal way. Earlier I had mentioned that I also lead our engagement for India for driving more companies to come to Zero Week in Houston. It's our annual meeting of partners every March, and for a week in March. And I think one of the things which when Indian companies and other Asian companies have come, I think it just opens the entire envelope on the energy conversation in terms of all the options that there are. There's so many technology options out there, some at lower technology readiness levels, some at higher technology readiness levels, some which are being piloted. And I mean, the spectrum is immense. I mean, we even talk about geothermal within nuclear, not just fission, but also fusion, which is viewed as the ultimate, limitless, cleaner source of energy. So I think one has to really open one's envelope and understand uh, energy pricing, energy cost, the value you are trying to maximize, the objective function you're trying to maximize. Because ultimately, if energy, which is one of the single most important line items on OPEX, and it is a strategic board level agenda, if it is addressed in the right framework, as you also pointed to the trilemma, right? If you can balance that trilemma in the best possible way, you will deliver possibly, arguably, the best shareholder value.
So I think a lot of context to what you have given, and
Mhm.
the discussion is more to look at energy at a level of the enterprise, looking at how it can diversify, how we can look at bringing
Mhm.
the sustainability. Now, with that, how can the companies build diverse energy portfolios without creating excessive complexity, cost, or dependency on immature technologies?
I think it's a very relevant question again for both energy and non-energy boards, because a proactive approach would ideally mean a portfolio approach to see what is that right mix of mature energy technologies, so higher technology readiness levels, which are already in the market, which have possibly even an element of fossil fuels, because for to bring that layer of reliability and resilience, and then how can renewable sources be maximized to bring in a lower emissions profile to that entire portfolio. So, how can one maximize on the combination of the best emissions profile with the best resilience profile? And when those two things are brought together, you do bring together uh, possibly a mix of both the fossil end of energy and the renewable end of energy, and it again takes me back to something which was shared at Zero Week this year in March. One of the largest transactions, M&A transactions that have happened recently, has been between two large utilities in America,
Mm.
Nextera and Dominion, about 100, almost $129 billion transaction, one of the largest. And the leadership from Nextera actually shared that what they are trying to provide to their customers as a utility is this portfolio approach. That what is that right mix of solar, wind, batteries, and gas, which can deliver the best solution for the customers. I mean, let's not forget one thing, that whether it was the US grid, Texas faced a huge grid failure a few years back. Um,
Mm.
2 years back, Spain faced the
Yeah.
Iberian Peninsula had a big blackout in the month of April. Northern India had a big blackout in 2012. So, resilience will mean the lack of such events, or the assurance that such events will not happen. And for that, one needs the right mix of energy storage, the right mix of a certain amount of fossil fuels, supporting the inexorable and absolutely needed growth in renewables to lower the emissions trajectory, which, of course, for companies, since we are talking about companies here, sits under the whole plans to reduce scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, and also in some cases methane emissions. And at the level of countries, it sits under the net zero frameworks. And somewhere these worlds have to meet.
Got it, Gauri. I think when we look at this point alone, I think you need a bigger time to discuss these pointers, because it has diverse implications, diverse risks that are there, and you also need to look at having a benchmark set for what is that we use this year, what is that we are going to consume next year based on the future plans and the current AI driven world, because the GPUs are using a lot of power and
Mhm.
cooling today, right? So it is not just uh, we have power, we have two sources of power. That does not work in
It's
today's
not
world.
simple. It's not as simple as that. Yes.
It's not as simple as it is more complex. Now, what role should renewables, storage, conventional fuels, clean fuels, efficiently and long-term procurement contracts play in resilient energy mix? That's what we want, because it's not as simple as we speak. I think there's multiple things involved. Your take on it?
Right.
Gauri.
Right. So I think what is fascinating is that we have a generational window of opportunity here to really construct, as we speak, a newer energy system, a newer, cleaner, and at the same time a resilient energy system. This, of course, brings other dependencies as well. If you look at, for instance, the growth in electric vehicles, for instance, which is closely tied to the grid, but also to the mobility story, the mobility transition. Uh, it will require dependence on critical minerals. It will require dependence on critical minerals which are geographically concentrated in certain parts of the world, especially on the refining side of those minerals. And so I think those bring even greater dependency. So it is not as simple to say that, a grid. I mean, we see a lot of celebration in terms of higher rates of EV usage. But
Mm.
my question is that if we are using higher amounts of EVs in a grid which is still predominantly on the generation side,
Yeah.
70% plus coal based in India, how clean is that grid? It's just that the emissions are happening not at the point at the tailpipe. Right. So I think one has to keep these things in perspective. That as we bring in more renewables, we need to make them more resilient. We need to make them more dispatchable, and that happens, of course, with bringing in more storage, uh, bringing in also reliance on certain cleaner fossil fuels, like, for instance, gas. And
Mm.
we are seeing that, I mean, there are case studies here, if you look around the world, at how all these different sources of energy are being integrated. And I think the conversation we're having so far is predominantly one which is centered on the power system. But for a minute, if we start looking at the transport system, right? If you look at transport, the moment you look at transport, you are opening the envelope to sectors like freight, sectors like long haul transport. And those actually, again, are very dependent on the oil economy, very dependent on the whole, diesel story for long haul trucking, for instance. But again, there are there are options here to reduce scope one emissions, to bring in e-buses, e-trucks, to also make sure that the operations of these fossil fuel based entities can be solarized, for instance. So there are options to, I think, make every function lower emission. I think there is a pathway from a higher emission profile to go to a lower emission profile. And that, I think, has to first flow from the boards as a board mandate, to look at all the options, to approve those options. And that's again where I'm really glad, Prem, you started with the right question, this whole conversation, that how do we elevate the energy conversation from being a procurement decision, from being a shop floor decision, to a boardroom decision. And really, this is my daily job, to do this with a lot of different companies, which are not the traditional energy companies, which are not energy producers, which are not IPPs, but which are large energy consumers, because that's where the piece on board education, that's where the piece on training, sensitizing, because these companies are in the business of manufacturing whatever they deliver to consumers, whether it's fast moving consumer goods, whether it's steel, whether it's airlines. I mean, look at airlines, right? I mean, in the whole crisis, they've been significantly exposed. And one of the tools, Prem, if you will, I'd like to bring in is where the financial aspect, where the I think the CFOs come to play, and it is not done sufficiently in India, is hedging. I think we're now at a point where there are more instruments that are coming in the market to be able to hedge. S&P Global introduced its dated Brent contract at the National Stock Exchange recently, about a couple of months back. We also have a new natural gas futures, which is coming into the National Stock Exchange. So I think hedging, because there were airlines like Indigo, for instance, who were very exposed to the high the price volatility, and one of those instruments is hedging. So I do see that that is also an area where boards will have to come in more, and I can see the finance and CFO teams to be very actively involved in that discussion.
So thanks for that. I think we are on top of the. I'll look at some pointers here. See
Okay.
what we see is at these points. What we see is manufacturing organization may require firm power, backup capacity, and thermal energy alternatives. A
Right.
digital company may prioritize on grid capacity, renewables, procurement, storage, geography, flexibility, and energy efficient computing. So we can
Right.
reduce with our data centers, also look at having energy efficient devices there. So I think what should the leaders evaluate at the total cost resilience should include interruption losses. That's the
Mm-hmm.
first point.
Yes.
What is that we get into? Price volatility, because every time there is a change in the energy cost and the geopolitical scenarios, the price volatility becomes bigger, right?
And
Now,
that's where hedging becomes a very important instrument, which I
yeah.
think is missing right now.
And the other point is you cannot have a fully backed up system also, which is parallel to keep that running. So which
Mm-hmm.
is a bigger risk for us to have that kind of a infrastructure to be maintained. And carbon related costs again come into picture here, is what I understand, right?
Right.
Contractual penalties if you are not giving the uptimes that are
Right.
required for businesses, that could be and
Right.
if there is no availability of some of the critical systems, even the supply chain can be disrupted, right? Yeah,
Absolutely.
this brings up to another point where you also look at reputation and customer requirements changing because of these factors.
Mm-hmm.
That also will change. And
Yeah.
and when you said, right, the in India we had the blackout, right?
Mm-hmm.
2012 is what you said, right? And that's a it will be a long term exposure, also saying asset exposure. This is not there. This is where we look at it. Those can be one of the pointers that are one of the considerations. And international agencies estimate the global energy investment would reach approximately 3.3 trillion by the end of this year. Around 2.2 trillion expected to flow into as renewable energy, nuclear energy, grid storage, efficient electrification, and other cleaner areas. Right? These are some of the pointers that we see from the Indian International Energy Agency estimations. And the cheapest energy decision today is becoming the most expensive resilience failure tomorrow. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
the stand that we would like to.
Very
With
well
this,
said.
I would like to take some of the takeaways that we are going to see as part of this podcast that we have spoken in the last 40 minutes, right? Just give me a second. I'll bring up those pointers where, yeah. So one of the critical pointer that I have noted for this discussion is energy is becoming a strategic resilience variable today. That's
Yeah.
the first thing. And what changed, as you rightly said, energy is no longer merely an operating input or a sustainable metric. So it is the essential thing for the business to run. Why it
Exactly.
matters today is availability, affordability, flexibility now directly affect continuity, digital expansions, margin, and market access, right? These are the point that I have. Then coming to companies must balance reliability, affordability, sustainability without optimizing one's dimension at exposure or expansion expenses of the entire business. That's the third point that I want to like. The
Right.
greatest vulnerability may exist within a supplier,
Mm-hmm.
grid, right, region, cloud provider. Again, if you look at cloud provider in today's context, it is across and everything is on a grid, right, today. And again, coming to logistic network, how we can ship things from one place to another with the logistic systems being available, that may be part of the data center also, right? And this then mineral exposure or critical equipment manufacture. These are the pointers that I have taken as a takeaway from the session that we have done, Gauri.
I'd like to add just two more things to this,
Yeah.
that because I think where I would tie all these pieces together to elevate the conversation across the organization and at the board level is to really answer two questions. That one is, there are boards ready for the right energy conversation? Are they looking at the right metrics, right? And are AI and data center companies investing trillions of dollars, are they ready for understanding energy and its options in its fullness? So I think, is there a board readiness for energy, and is there
Yeah.
an energy readiness for AI? And
Mm.
I'll give two hints, I would say, in terms of, two metrics which I think will be important for boards in India and elsewhere. One is to understand the total cost of ownership when it comes on the consumer end, and this is a variable which is looked very closely by our mobility teams. In terms of, the total cost of ownership of a car, for instance, like what's the total cost of ownership of an EV versus an ICE engine?
Mm.
And I think in terms of systems, especially the power system, what is the total cost of reliability? And and when one starts to answer these total cost questions, that's where the discussion shifts on price and what
Mm.
you value. What are you paying for?
Correct. Got it, Gauri. So these are this is very important. Gauri. Thank you for bringing such valuable combination of energy intelligence, economics, policy, strategy, and board level thinking to this conversation. You helped us to recognize energy resilience is not achieved by selecting a fashionable technology or pursuing the lowest available price. So that's very important. It is creating or created by understanding dependencies, which we had accordingly, balancing competing priorities, preparing for disruption, and making choices that preserve organizations' availability to operate and grow. That's the point that we've seen in this whole conversation. The message is very clear for us to say that companies remain resilient, will not to those the simplify consume less. They will be those who understand energy as a strategic system and design their business accordingly. So that's the point that we want to take, and with this we are on top of the hour, and we would like to conclude our session for today. Any pointers that you want to add as a final pointer, Gauri, before we conclude?
Well, thank you so much for having me on the 380th episode of Preeminent Conclave. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I was glad to share some of the ideas we work very actively on in S&P Global. And really, this is an invitation also to the community here, which is a very diverse community, as you shared with me, to really look at what S&P Global we're trying to do in terms of our energy portfolio, the energy conversation at CereWeek, and also how we are, serving the boards of companies here across the energy and non-energy spectrums to really um, do bring the right conversation throughout the organization, starting, of course, with the boards, and to ensure that there's a certain readiness to understand, and the right frameworks and the right metrics are really being discussed, understood, and strategized upon. Thank you so
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you, Gauri. Thank you, audience, for joining us. And with this, we would like to conclude our show. And we have another episode coming up tomorrow. Please stay tuned and see you tomorrow. Good day.
All the best for it. Thank you.
Thank you.